Today we're going to do a demonstration on how to create a watercolor practice sheet for our 7th grade art class here. Now the goal of this is to practice mixing some different values with watercolor and also practice getting a little cast light and shadow onto some three-dimensional objects. What you need is to create a value scale with 6 separate colors, and in each color you're going to have 7 values. We'll start in the middle, go lighter in one direction and darker on the other. We also want 4 three-dimensional shapes. We want 2 round shapes that have a gradation from dark to light to make them appear round, and also 2 flat-sided 3D shapes like a pyramid and a cube. Alright. Some materials you will need for this are some water, a brush. The size of the brush is important. You want a brush that is going to fit the shapes that you're trying to paint without getting too much or too little water. If it's too small, it might take a long time. Too big, you won't be able to control the amount of water. You also want a mixing tray, the color you're going to use, a pure hue color, and also a darker color. It's also good to have a paper towel as well. So, let's start by moistening the paint here. And I'm going to paint right on the pure hue in my middle section so that I have 3 on one side, 3 on the other. Be careful with the edge of my brush, constantly watching it to stay in the lines. It's really important to try to control the amount of water you keep on your brush. Then I'm going to moisten my brush and create a pile in my mixing tray. I'm going to make a pile here. Pure pigment without too much water so that it still appears nice and rich in hue right now. In watercolor we control the value by how much hue and paint is on the paper. The lights of the paper shining through is what creates the kind of value in watercolor. So in order to make this next square a little lighter, or this next section, I'm going to take a little bit of water. I'm going to load my brush with water, dip it in, and then clean my brush out and paint this on here. I'm going to spread it a little bit thinner if I want it to appear lighter. My goal is to make it a little bit lighter than this last section. This time I'm going to wash my brush out again. I like to wipe it in paper towel to control how much water is there. I'm going to add 2 brush loads this time of pigment, or of water. Wash it out again. Paint from my palette here. It should be lighter than the last one. This last one, I still have a little bit of residual hue in here. I'm going to make a mix with some of the water in my tray and just use that water with the hint of paint that's still in my brush to create that. Alright, and that's how you do the lighter side. Now we're going to paint the darker side here. The pile of pigment that I've already made for the lighter side is pretty watered down, so that's not going to work for this dark side, because each value in the darker side has to be just as dark as the center one. Plus we're going to mix with another color, a darker color. For the warm colors I'm going to use brown, and the cool colors black. I like to use dark brown with the warms because it feels a little more natural, and especially with yellow and orange, it doesn't turn as kind of a gross green color. So I'm going to take this pile of watered down red and use this as my water and kind of recharge the pile. I want it really rich in hue and not as much water. And I'm also going to make another pile in my palette of pure brown. Also, I don't want it too watery. I want to get it nice and rich. The important part on the dark side is that you don't allow too much water in, or no matter how much dark color you mix in, it'll appear lighter. So I'm going to take one drip of this brown and mix it into my lighter red here. It's important when you're mixing in paint that you should always take the dark color and mix into the lighter color, because the dark color can really overwhelm. If you mix the light into the dark, you end up having to add way too much of the lighter color in order to get the desired value. It should look a little darker than my solid red. Then, without washing my brush, because I don't want to get too much water, going back to my brown pile and mixing some more into this red. I also don't want to spread this out too thin. I want to keep it nice and dark. Lastly, I'm going to add a little more brown here. I'm going to take a little bit of the red and just mix it into this brown pile for the last value. It's basically going to be dark brown with a little hint of red. When you're finished, you should get a nice range from dark all the way to light. If, when this dries, some of the darks appear too light, we can always add more layers. In watercolors, the more layers you add, the darker the value. Step. I'm going to paint a sphere to appear round using watercolor paint. The secret to making spheres and other objects look round in painting and art is to have smooth gradations from dark to light across your object. First, I want to think about where my light source is. Let's imagine my light is coming from the upper left area here and shining onto this sphere. It would cast a shadow to this side. So I'm going to start with my darks on the side opposite the light and use water to kind of pull the pigment across it. So I'm going to use a blue this time. And I'll start out with just a stroke of pure color in the shadowy area. And watercolor actually works very well to quickly create blends of value. Then I'm going to moisten my brush in the water. And you have to work kind of quickly for this technique. And I'm going to moisten the edge here and kind of use the water to pull out some of the pigment. And I'm working in kind of a circular motion. I'm going to clean my brush again and add a little more pure hue. Once again, working fairly quickly. If this dries, you won't be able to completely blend it as well. You can see I create a nice round gradation from dark to light. Make the sphere appear very round. This would be the first layer of this. I could always go back in with some extra layers if I wanted to increase the dark values, or maybe pull out a little more of the light in order to make it appear more smooth and more round. See, the more I work it with my brush, the smoother it appears. In the shadows, I'll do a nice dark hue. I can always mix in a little black to make it appear even darker. And that's how you do a blend from dark to light across the sphere. On the shape of a cylinder, it would be similar, only we would want to go dark to light across the side of the shape and keep it flat on one side of the top. When you get to your flat-sided objects, make sure that each side has a different value, with the darkest being on the shadowy side and then a medium and a light.